In 1999, a 10-year-old girl woke to the sound of her friend screaming. Groggy and disoriented, she lifted her head, only to see a shadowy figure looming over her friend, a knife pressed to the girl's throat. Before she could process what was happening, the blade flashed and her friend went silent. The man, satisfied with his work, turned to leave. But then he hesitated. A quick glance back at the room, and his eyes locked onto hers. In an instant, he lunged at her, the cold steel slicing across her throat. Convinced he had finished the job, the man vanished into the night. But he had made a terrible mistake. Clutching her throat, the girl forced herself to move. Stumbling through the house, she made it outside, her vision swimming. She reached another home and banged on the door with all the strength she had left. She tried to scream, to beg for help, but no sound came. Her vocal cords had been severed. When the door finally opened, the horrified resident wasted no time calling 911. Once recovered, she worked with the police to create a sketch, one that would ultimately lead to the capture of Tommy Lynn Sells, the ruthless serial killer known as the Coast to Coast Killer. His reign of terror ended in a Texas courtroom, where he was sentenced to death and later executed.
What would you do if you saw a man parade in the streets holding a decapitated head, claiming that he was God? I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Jennifer Mills Westley. Jennifer was a 60-year-old woman enjoying her retirement in sunny Tenerife. Originally from Norwich, she was a mother of two, and she and her daughters were best friends, and she was the best nana to her 5 grandchildren. Jennifer would be described as a vibrant woman. She was bubbly, she was full of life, and she was the type of person who would do anything for anyone. She worked for Norwich Council for 15 years in the road safety sector, and as part of her job she would go into primary schools and educate the young children about road safety, and the children all gravitated towards her. Jennifer was very calm and warm by nature. After her retirement, being the sun lover that she was, she decided to up and move to Tenerife, and this was in 2006. On the 13th of May 2011, Jennifer jumped out of bed with excitement because today was finally the day that her daughter was coming to visit, and Jennifer couldn't wait. She was up and out early, heading to the shops to pick up a couple of last minute bits. But while she was out, she would get an uneasy feeling. Realising that a man had been following her, Jennifer dipped into an employment centre and relayed her concern onto a security guard who shooed the man away. Jennifer stayed behind for a couple of minutes to make sure that this man was gone, and when she thought that he was, she headed back out of the building, going to a nearby supermarket. She had no idea that that man was still following her. It was around 10:30 a.m. when Jennifer is in a Chinese supermarket and she's strolling along the aisles, looking up and down the shelves, when out of nowhere, the man who had been following her lunged at her from behind. He was armed with 2 knives, one of them being 22 centimeters long, and he began to ferociously stab and slash Jennifer in the neck, and within seconds, he had completely decapitated her. This all happened so fast that Jennifer didn't even have time to react to what was happening. She had no time to try and escape or even defend herself. After decapitating Jennifer in broad daylight in a shop filled with people, this man picked up her head, ran outside of the street and began to parade it almost as if he was proud of what he had just done, all while shouting about being God on earth. A very brave security man would chase down, tackle and restrain this man up until the police arrived to arrest him. This man was 29-year-old Dejan Dejanov, a paranoid schizophrenic, homeless drug addict who at the time of the murder was wanted by police. Originally from Bulgaria, Dejan would sort of float from place to place and country to country, and he would pick up odd jobs as he went by, leaving devastation behind everywhere he went. While visiting his auntie in Wales in the early 2000s, his auntie would contact the police because she was so concerned about her nephew. He was claiming that he was God, that he was the Messiah, and that he had powers. He was paranoid, thinking that he was being stalked and that there was cameras watching him everywhere. He would be admitted to an NHS psychiatric unit where he stayed for only 18 days before being let out. He did do a second stint in the psych ward, and during his time here, he would be quoted saying, "I will have to to murder someone to get deported back to Bulgaria. But despite showing no real signs of improvement with his mental health, and after making this statement, he was still allowed to leave the hospital, and after this he would make his way over to Tenerife. Quite quickly after his arrival, Dayan would become a familiar face to Tenerife police. He was known for his violence and how erratic his behaviour could be, and quite quickly after his arrival, the Tenerife police would consider him a threat to the public. After smashing a rock in a complete stranger's face in a completely unprovoked attack, the Tenerife police would issue a warrant out for his arrest, and this was only days before he decapitated and murdered Jennifer. His trial began in 2013, and the defence tried to put forward Dayan's medical history and mental health issues as part of his defence, trying to claim that he had diminished responsibility. Despite these issues being very prominent, I believe that under Spanish law, they still held him fully accountable for the murder, and because of that, a jury would find him guilty of the murder of Jennifer Mills Wesley. He would be ordered to spend 20 years within a psychiatric unit in Seville in Spain. When asked if he had any words to say or if he wanted to make a statement, he would say through an interpreter, quote, "I am the second reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and I will bring the fire of the Holy Spirit to bear against this court."
He's known as the Brain Eater and the most dangerous prisoner in the UK. Robert Maudsley holds the world record for the longest time spent in solitary confinement. He's been in solitary confinement for 46 years. They keep him in a glass cage underground behind 17 locked doors because he's seen as so dangerous. Just a very quick warning before we get into all the details. In this case, we are going to talk about the abuse and SA of children. Robert Maudsley and his siblings were removed from their parents' custody when Robert was only 6 months old due to severe neglect and abuse. So Robert and his siblings grew up in an orphanage, but this was actually a really happy time because it was the first time they were ever actually treated well. And this life was all that Robert ever knew because he was taken from his parents when he was a baby. But when Robert was 9 years old, his parents decided that they wanted their kids back. And these people are complete strangers to Robert, and they're still super neglectful and abusive. The house was disgusting, and Robert got the worst of his father George's abuse because he was always trying to help his siblings. Robert's father, George, is an absolute monster. He actually began to SA 9-year-old Robert. And then within only 1 year of living with his parents, Robert was either removed from his parents' custody once again, or he was sent back to the orphanage by his parents. And then by the age of 16, Robert was alone living on the streets. He got into substances and got into work just to survive. And it was at some point while Robert was living on the streets that he was SA'd again. Robert's really depressed. He's really struggling with his mental health, and he actually tried to seek help. He was in and out of different psychiatric facilities, and he repeatedly told the doctors that he was hearing voices telling him to kill his parents, but no one did anything about it. And then in March of 1974, Robert is 20 years old and he's with a client, a 30-year-old man named John Farrell. Two of them are in bed, they're doing stuff, and then out of nowhere, the client, John, gets out of bed, he goes over to his dresser and grabs a stack of photos and shows them to Robert. These photos were of this man SAing multiple children. I guess because Robert was homeless and an worker, this client thought that he would be okay with this. But this brought Robert right back to when he was a child being SA'd by his father. Robert just snapped and he killed his client. And afterwards, he didn't even try to cover it up. 20-year-old Robert went to the police and he turned himself in. It was determined, however, that Robert was unfit to stand trial because he wasn't sane. So Robert was sent to the first ever asylum for the criminally insane. And at this hospital, Robert lived a good handful of years, but he made it very clear that he hated people who committed SA crimes, especially towards children. And then in 1977, at the age of 23 years old, Robert met another patient at this psychiatric facility, and his name was David Allen Francis. And David is a convicted PDF file who Robert hates. They remind him of his father, who the voices in his head tell him to kill. Robert tells another patient at the hospital that he wants to kill David, and the other patient is down to help him. So the two of them begin planning. Robert steals like a plastic spoon from the kitchen and files down the handle of the spoon to be a sharp weapon. And by the way, the other patient that's going to help Robert kill David is also named David, so just to make it easier, I'm going to call him Other Patient. And then one day when the three men are alone together, Robert locks them in a room, and then him and Other Patient attack David. This is a brutal, vicious, long attack that lasted 9 hours. The entire time the hospital staff is trying to get into this room because it's supposed to be a high security mental health hospital. And after 9 hours of vicious, brutal attack, David passed away. Afterwards, Robert just calmly opens the door and walks out, like nothing happened. The scene that the hospital staff saw inside this room was horrific. I mean, just imagine, it lasted 9 hours. I don't even think I could explain how brutal of a scene this was. But there was a spoon nearby, and because of what terrible of a condition David's body was left in after 9 hours, the hospital staff actually believed that Robert had eaten David's brain. This was a rumor, but the media ran with it. And although Robert was previously deemed unfit to stand trial, this crime literally happened in a psychiatric hospital. Robert was now deemed fit to stand trial, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he would serve that in a real prison. And it just so happened that this prison happened to have a large amount of criminals who committed SA crimes. And we know how Robert feels about them. Within 1 year of being in this prison, Robert's still hearing the voices, and he begins planning another attack. Once again, he gets his hand on a plastic spoon and he files down the handle to be a sharp weapon. Robert lured an inmate into his cell named Senley Darwood. This man was in prison for the death of his wife, but he was a registered SA offender. Robert attacked him with his spoon, and after it was done, Robert shoved his body under his bed, cleaned himself up, and then went out looking for another victim because Robert was not done. Robert walked into the cell of another inmate named William Roberts. This man was in prison for the crimes he committed against children. Robert attacked him with his spoon in an absolute frenzy. And after, just like before, Robert doesn't try to cover up his crimes. He walks straight up to the prison guard, hands him his makeshift weapon, and says, "Looks like you'll be short 2 on roll call later." Again, Robert shows no remorse. He thinks that him taking out people who've committed crimes against children is him doing the world a favor. But this time, it was decided that Robert was just too dangerous to be around other inmates. Robert, at the age of 25 years old, was put in solitary confinement. This is when a prisoner is put in a small dark cell and is given no interaction with any other person indefinitely. And solitary confinement is well known to really mess with the human mind, not being able to speak to anyone for long periods of time. It's still widely used today, even though it's very controversial, and a lot of people see it as cruel and unusual punishment. Eventually, the prison built Robert his very own solitary confinement cell. It's a very small glass cage, so Robert can be monitored 24/7. He gets no privacy. The cage is underground, and you have to go through 17 locked doors just to get there. His bed is a concrete block. He gets no sunlight. He's completely isolated. Not even the prison guards are allowed to talk to him. This is the last photo taken of Robert. It was taken all the way back in the 80s. There is 0 documented photos taken of Robert since then, or of his underground prison cell. All we know is that the cell for Hannibal Lecter in the Silence of the Lamb movie is inspired by Robert's cell. For years, Robert tried to deny his stay in solitary confinement, but it's always been denied. And to this day, in this exact moment, Robert Maudsley is still in solitary confinement. He was put in solitary confinement when he was 25 years old. He is 71 years old today. He's been in solitary confinement for 46 years. He holds the world record for the longest time in solitary confinement. At some point, the prison gave him like a TV and a PlayStation, stuff like that, but then they just randomly took them back. This is a very recent update from just this month. And Robert has just given up, and he's currently on a hunger strike. Have you guys ever heard this case before? When I was reading it for the first time, my jaw was literally on the floor. Have you guys heard this case before? What are your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments while you're there. Tell me what case you want to see me cover next. And until then, I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.
This man checked into a hotel under a fake name, and days later the staff would find him in his room, which was locked from the outside, barely clinging to life. It was January 2nd, 1935, when a man walked into the hotel President located in Kansas City, Missouri. This man was dressed nice, wearing a dark overcoat, but he had no luggage, which to the hotel staff was a bit odd. Typically guests checking into a hotel have luggage, but they didn't pay this much mind. What did stand out was this man's appearance. He had a noticeable scar on the side of his head and cauliflower ear, which led the staff to speculate that this man might be a professional boxer or wrestler. He introduced himself as Roland T. Owen, that he was from Los Angeles, and he made a specific request for a room that faced the courtyard rather than the street. After checking in, Roland went up to his room in the elevator with a bellhop named Randolph, and during the ride he mentioned that he just stayed at another hotel in the area. However, the nightly rate there was too high, so he decided to move to the hotel President instead. The two men reached the 10th floor, and Randolph showed Roland to his room, which was room 1046. And Randolph stayed for a few more minutes. He saw Roland take a comb, hairbrush, and toothpaste out of his jacket pocket and place them on the sink, and it was clear that this was all Roland had with him. Around noon, one of the hotel's maids, a woman named Mary, stopped by room 1046. Now, when Mary got up there, she expected the previous guest, who was a woman, to be in the room, but when Roland opened the door, she was surprised and insisted she could come back later. Roland had just checked in, so she didn't want to bother, but Roland said it was fine, she could just come in. Mary entered the room and noticed that the room itself was almost completely dark. The shades were closed and the only light came from a small table lamp. She cleaned up a bit and watched Roland put on his coat, comb his hair, and step out of the room, asking her if she could keep the door unlocked as she left because he was expecting some friends. Mary later told police that every encounter she had with Roland during his stay, it appeared that he was always scared or worried about something, and he always preferred that the room was completely dark except for one dimly lit lamp. Around 4 p.m., Mary came back to Roland's room with clean towels and noticed the door was still unlocked just as she had left it. But when she walked in, Roland was lying fully dressed on the made-up bed looking like he was asleep. On the nightstand, she noticed a note that read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes, wait." The next morning at 10:30, Mary was making her usual rounds. When she got to Roland's room, she found that the door was locked from the outside. And to Mary, this likely meant Roland had already left for the day and locked the door behind him. But when she used her key to unlock the door and step inside, she found Roland sitting in the dimly lit room just as he had been the day before. She quietly went about tidying up the area, but then the phone rang. Roland picked up the phone and said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast." After a pause, he repeated, "No, I'm not hungry," and then hung up the phone. Roland started asking Mary questions. He started asking her about her job, how many rooms she was responsible for, whether any permanent residents lived at the hotel, and then casually complained again about the high prices of the neighboring hotels. Mary politely answered, finished up her cleaning, and left. She returned later that afternoon with fresh towels, but this time as she approached the room, she heard two male voices coming from inside. It sounded like there was some kind of argument. She knocked on the door, explained she was there with towels, but someone inside, using a voice she didn't recognize, said that they didn't need them. Later that same evening, around 6 p.m., a woman named Jean checked into the room next to Roland's, and according to her, there was a lot of commotion coming from what she assumed was room 1046. It wasn't just men arguing, but there was women's voices as well. Jean wasn't the only one to notice strange behavior that night. According to the hotel's elevator operator, the 10th floor was unusually active, including a loud party happening in room 1055. Operator also noticed a woman who was in and out of the hotel frequenting the rooms of male guests. She said she had a client in room 1026 but couldn't seem to find it. She was seen on multiple floors searching until finally giving up and going home. When the night turned into the early morning hours of January 4th, things began to settle down until around 7 a.m. That is when the hotel's switchboard operator noticed that the phone in room 1046 was off of the hook. At first, she waited about 10 minutes to see if the guest would hang it back up, but when it stayed off, she sent Randolph, one of the bellhops, to check on the room and politely asked the guest to put the phone back on the hook. When Randolph remembered room 1046. He'd been the one to show Roland to his room a couple of days earlier. When he got got to the door, he knocked, expecting Roland to answer, but instead, a man with a deep voice called out from inside, telling Randolph to come in and turn on the lights. But the door was locked from the outside, and the man inside never came to open the door. Randolph knocked a few more times, trying to get the man to open the door, but with no luck, he finally gave up. He assumed that the guest was drunk or just being difficult. He called back through the door, telling the man to put the phone back on the hook, and left. But the phone stayed off the hook. By 8:30 a.m., the switchboard operator sent another bellhop, Harold, to check on room 1046 again. When Harold got to the room, it was still locked from the outside, so he used his key to unlock the door. As he pushed it open, the room was dark, but the faint light from the hallway revealed what he assumed was Roland lying naked on the bed. He noticed Roland was breathing very heavily, and there was a dark spot on the sheets that Harold assumed was just a shadow. Much like Randolph, Harold figured Roland was drunk and didn't want to disturb him. He walked over, put the phone back on the hook, and left without thinking much of it. And I think everyone was starting to get really pissed off with Roland because 2 hours later, around 10:30 a.m., the switchboard operator noticed yet again the phone in room 1046 was off the hook. They sent Randolph back up, and I imagine Randolph was just kind of done with the entire situation. He stomped upstairs, knocked 3 times, and opened the door with his key, probably ready to tell Roland to stop touching the phone. But when he flung the door open, there was Roland, just 2 feet away from the door, on his hands and knees, holding his head in his hands. He was still alive, but blood was dripping from his head, and it wasn't just there. Blood was everywhere. It was smeared across the walls, soaked into the bed, and pooled into the bathroom. Roland wasn't just bleeding, he was also bound. A cord was tied tightly around his wrists, ankles, and neck, leaving no doubt that someone had brutally attacked him. Randolph ran downstairs and got the hotel's assistant manager, who called the police and a doctor. The first person to arrive was the doctor, and he noticed that Roland had been stabbed multiple times, deep wounds that had punctured one of his lungs, and his skull was fractured. It was very clear that someone had brutally attacked Roland, but when the doctor and detective, who had now arrived on scene, asked Roland who had done this to him, he said nobody, and that he'd fallen against the bathtub. Roland was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately he passed away the next morning, and doctors speculated that when Roland was found, some of the blood that were on his first wounds were about 6 to 7 hours old, which meant that every single time someone came into that room to tell Roland to put his phone back on the hook, he was already very seriously injured. And the scene itself was very shocking, because although Roland claimed nobody had done this to him, that he had been the one falling against the bathtub and somehow after falling managed to stab and puncture his lung, there were no weapons in his room, and all of his clothing and belongings he had brought with him were gone. Investigators were only able to find a label from a necktie, a hairpin, an unsmoked cigarette, and a glass that had what investigators believed to be women's fingerprints. Detectives in Kansas City reached out to the Los Angeles Police Department asking about a Roland T. Owen because he gave a Los Angeles address, but detectives in Los Angeles said they had no records of a Roland T. Owen. So this man was unidentified, and according to a memo from KCPD, shortly after Roland's death, a man called and said he'd pay for this unidentified man who called himself Roland to be buried in Memorial Park. Most published pieces say that this caller also mentioned that he wanted to pay for a spot near his sister's plot, but that piece of information was never actually recorded by KCPD. When the caller was asked about his connection to Roland, he said that Roland hadn't played the game fair, and cheaters usually get what's coming to them. Money for his burial was sent, and at the funeral, 13 roses arrived with a card that read, "Love Forever, Louise." But police still had no idea who Roland was, and it would take 2 years for him to be identified. In November 1936, Roland was officially identified by his mother as Artemis Ogletree. His mother, Ruby, saw his photo on the cover of a magazine and noticed that the scar on his head looked a lot like her son's. Artemis was just 19 years old and had left Birmingham, Alabama with his friend Joe Simpson in April of 1934 to hitchhike across the country. According to Joe, the two made it to Los Angeles where they went their separate ways, and according to Ruby, Artemis arrived in Kansas City in the middle of August, and at first he stayed at the St. Regis Hotel. Police would later find that Artemis stayed at the St. Regis with a man who signed the hotel registry as Donald Kelso. Two seemed to have separated, and by the new year, Artemis stayed a short while at another hotel before finding his way to the President Hotel, checking in under the name Roland T. Owen. During his time in Kansas City, he sent letters to his mom. At first, they were handwritten and talked about his search for a job, that a man he met was going to open a business and give him half interest in it. He even went on to say that this man was the best friend he had ever had, and he had a big Cadillac. However, after his death, which his mom had no idea that he had died at that point, she began receiving letters from Artemis that had been typed out, and Artemis didn't know how to type. She said the letters didn't sound like him at all. Now, the theories in this case were that Artemis had likely been killed by Dawn. However, no one knew who Dawn was. Dawn is a name used for a crime boss, the leader of a major crime family. Maybe this was mob related, which would explain code language that he referred to this man as Dawn, but that's just speculation. The theory involved that woman who had been seen by the hotel's elevator operator. Maybe this woman had something to do with Artemis's death because of those women's fingerprints found on a glass in his room. The elevator operator also mentioned that at one point this woman wasn't alone. She was seen with a man who wasn't Roland, and people began wondering, could this man have been Dawn? But unfortunately, none of these theories have ever been proven. In 1940, there was a man named Thomas Barlow who had been convicted of what was called crimes against nature, and police noticed that his signature looked a lot like the signature of the Donald Kelso who was staying at the St. Regis with Artemis at one point. But again, this was another dead end. There was another man named Joseph Ogden who was suspected of killing Artemis, and Joseph had killed a man named Oliver Sincall. He had shot him and dismembered him. So he had a criminal history of killing people, and according to Joseph's admission records to Sing Sing prison, he had been in prison several times, and one of his aliases was Donald Kelso, but his handwriting didn't match the Donald Kelso that was signed at the Regis Hotel. The last suspect was Joe Simpson, Artemis's buddy who had traveled with him for a period of time across the country, and Ruby was convinced that Joe was the one who killed her son. She told police that 8 months after his murder, she had received a call from a man in Memphis pretending to be a good friend of her son's, and this caller said his name was Godfrey Jordan and he met Artemis in Egypt. Ruby said she spent years trying to meet with Joe in Birmingham, but he stood her up multiple times, and finally in December of 1939, Ruby confronted Joe face to face. According to Ruby, she said that Joe said he believed the case would never be solved and that KCPD would never get the ones who killed Artemis. Ruby said she looked Joe in the eye and told him she would recognize that voice that spoke to her from Memphis from anywhere, and then Joe just turned red and was nervous. But it appears this was another dead end. This brings us to the end of the case. No one really knows what happened to Artemis Ogletree. Is it possible that maybe this Dawn character was with Artemis? Maybe they were together in a relationship, staying at the St. Regis Hotel. Something happened, they split ways, and then Dawn came back and killed Artemis? Was this somehow mob related and Dawn was actually a crime boss? If you have made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you for taking the time to listen to Artemis's story. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe happened? And I look forward to seeing you in another video.
This was one of those cases I thought I would go to my deathbed never knowing the truth. Investigators have reason to believe Aisha Degree was a victim of homicide. I just can't believe how many new updates there are in this case. For those of you that don't know, a 9-year-old girl called Aisha Degree seemingly left her home in the middle of the night of her own accord in a thunderstorm, and she's just never been seen again. Now, this was 25 years ago. She just vanished in the middle of the night, and to be honest, I doubted we'd ever get answers. I'll summarise everything new that we now know, but there is a huge deep dive on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation. In September 2024, the FBI got new search warrants to look into a family called the Deadman family. Now, these were 2 parents and 3 daughters. So how are the family linked to Aisha? Aisha was seen by drivers walking along North Carolina Highway 18, and witnesses saw her being pulled into a car that looked a little bit like this one. Turns out the Deadman family have a very similar vehicle. Also, some of Aisha's belongings were actually recovered, double bagged and disposed of, and DNA analysis of these items linked 2 people to them. One was a man called Russell Underhill, who was basically an acquaintance of the Deadman family, and also a Deadman family member. Also, I believe one of the Deadman sisters' hairs was found on Aisha's top. There's also a bunch of really suspicious sounding text messages that the police uncovered. Now, I'm not saying anybody is 100% guilty, but just from the search warrant documents, I'm shocked by what the family have said. Quotes such as, "I'm scared though, Dad is probably going to be a huge suspect. This is going to get nothing but worse. I'm just so worried, so worried. I mean, it's a nightmare that's going to keep getting worse. I can see nothing good happening anytime soon, and I'm an optimist." Again, huge deep dive on my podcast with loads of the text messages. A witness also stated in the 2000s he witnessed the Deadman daughters at a party. He said they were discussing the case and one allegedly said, "I killed Aisha Degree," and the other one told her to shut the F up. The witness passed a polygraph. I believe one of the Deadman daughters also took a polygraph after avoiding it for ages, but was found to be deceptive. She also, during the questioning, made a pretty shocking statement that was, "If my dad did it, he did it, but I had nothing to do with it."
One of the scariest things that I've ever heard is the voicemail that Henry McCabe left his wife before he mysteriously disappeared. On the evening of September 6, 2015, Henry was partying with some friends at a club called Publicski's in Minnesota. At this time, Henry's wife and 2 kids were staying with some family in California, so they weren't in town. When they were done partying, for reasons unknown, Henry's friend William dropped him off at a gas station at around 2 a.m. The following events that took place have never really been explained. At 2:28 a.m., Henry's wife gets a call from Henry, and at first it kind of seems like a pocket dial, but the sounds are literally terrifying. It sounded like he was moaning in pain, almost like growling noises, and you can't really make out what he's saying, although some believe that it sounded like he said he'd been shot. After 2 minutes of these horrifying sounds, a man yells, "Stop it," and then the call disconnects. Only part of the voicemail has ever been released. Here it is. Not long after this call, Henry also called his brother and left him a voicemail too. This time he was crying. Henry disappeared after this, and when he didn't show up for work the next day, he was reported missing to the Mounds View Police Department. At the start of the investigation, police talked with Henry's friend William, who dropped him off at the gas station that night. To their surprise, William had Henry's keys and wallet, and he says this is because he was trying to stop Henry from driving that night. William also tells the police which gas station he dropped Henry off at that night, and authorities immediately began looking for him. But after reviewing surveillance footage, it turns out that William told police the wrong gas station. Thanks to that surveillance footage, they found that William actually dropped Henry off at a Holiday gas station in the complete opposite direction in Fridley. This made more sense considering the area where his phone last pinged and sent that voicemail was in the vicinity of Creekview Park in New Brighton. So they then shifted their search area to this location, but it was like Henry vanished into thin air. There was no activity on his bank accounts, and he wasn't showing up to his job as a Department of Revenue auditor, which he loved. So that, paired with the horrifying voicemail that he left his wife that night, led authorities to believe that he was met with foul play, and even the FBI got involved. But there was literally no evidence of anything happening. There were so many searches for Henry, but every one of them turned up nothing. But then, 2 months later, someone kayaking on Rush Lake in New Brighton spotted something in the water. When police arrived, they discovered Henry's body, and he'd been in the water for quite some time. Despite his voicemail and him saying that he'd been shot, there were absolutely no signs of trauma to his body. The autopsy indicated that Henry possibly died from drowning, but as far as I can find, his manner of death remains undetermined. Some things just don't really add up in this case though, like the location of the club he was at that night, to where his phone last pinged and sent that voicemail, to where he ended up in the water. And the biggest question I have is, how did he get in the water? The gas station that he was dropped off at that night was 6 miles from the lake. Google Maps says that it would have taken him almost 2 hours to walk there, but he sent that voicemail at 2:28 in the morning, just minutes after being dropped off. If he tried to walk and got lost and just fell in the water, how did he get there so fast? And why did William drop him off at a gas station instead of his own house that night? The lake was within minutes of Henry's house, but if you remember, William kept his keys and wallet. So Henry essentially had no way of getting inside of his house, and he didn't have any identification on him if something were to happen. Those who knew Henry say he would never intentionally hurt himself. He was married for 11 years, had a job that he loved, and had 2 beautiful kids. Whatever truly happened to Henry McCabe and caused him to leave that horrifying voicemail that night remains a mystery 9 years later.
Disturbing, 1,000,000%. Shocking, however, not at all. This is explained in just a girl language. What does that mean? That I'm just a girl, you're just a girl, and this is explained in a way that makes sense to me and hopefully to you too. That being said, everything said is alleged. We're not lawyers, we don't know, no one has been proven guilty, so everything I'm saying is alleged and available for you to find on the internet. Sean Combs is P. Diddy, is Puff Daddy, is Diddy, is PD, is Puffy, is Love. Those are all his nicknames, but his name is Sean Combs. Sean Combs has had allegations, rumors, drama, death, suspicion surrounding him basically since the beginning of his career. By the end of 1993, Sean was around 24 years old when he was given his own label, Bad Boy Entertainment. Bad Boy becomes really successful with rappers like Biggie on the East Coast. On the West Coast, Death Row Records becomes really successful with rappers like Snoop Dogg and Tupac, thus making the West Coast rappers and the East Coast rappers enemies. September 13th, 1996, Tupac dies. His murder remains officially unsolved, but it has been rumored that Sean Combs played a part in that. March 9th, 1997, Biggie Smalls, one of Sean's best friends, was killed in LA. There are also rumors that Sean Combs was at the center of that. Throughout this time and until 2007, Sean would have an on and off relationship with model actress Kim Porter. They had kids together. That was from 1994 to 2007. In between that, Sean would date Jennifer Lopez from 1999 to 2001. In 1999, Sean and JLo were involved in an incident where a weapon went off and a woman was badly injured at a New York City nightclub. Sean Combs and JLo get arrested. JLo is not charged. Sean was charged. Faced trial but was acquitted of all charges. The woman that was injured at the nightclub, however, claims that Sean Combs was the one responsible. Allegedly, she sues Sean Combs. They settle for $130 million. In 2006, Sean hears singer Cassandra Ventura's first single, falls in love with it, signs her to his record label when she's only 19 years old and he's 38. Sean and Cassie get into a romantic relationship that would last until 2018. November 16th, 2023, Cassandra Ventura files a 35-page civil lawsuit against Sean Combs. In the lawsuit, she alleged a few things. First, that he abused her physically, emotionally, and sexually during their relationship, that he blew up Kid Cudi's car, that he tried to kill Suge Knight, who was former CEO of Death Row Records, and that he drugged her to force her to engage in sex acts with male workers, amongst other things. To backtrack, when Cassie and Sean first met before they got romantically involved, Sean was publicly dating Kim Porter and Cassie had a boyfriend of her own. When Cassie was first told that Sean was possibly interested in her, she was disgusted because of their age gap, but Sean was aware of the power dynamic and the control that he had over her because of her career, because she was signed to his record label. Sean would do what he could to get Cassie away from her boyfriend. He would force her to go to parties with him, claiming that they were for the record label, would force her to take pills, do drugs, until she was almost unconscious, more intoxicated than she's ever been, and then he would have sex with her. Sean Combs maintained professional, financial, and sexual control over Cassie, and to make sure that she complied and she did not try to fight anything, he would give her drugs consistently. Cassie said drugs, medications, and were always around, always open, and she described them to be like candy. Cassie began experiencing memory loss due to everything that was in her system, as well as the physical harm that Sean Combs exposed her to, and because Sean wanted to have control over that too, he would have all of Cassie's medical records sent to him instead of her. Throughout their entire relationship, Cassie was covered in bruises and injuries as a result of Sean's behavior to her. To avoid any accusations or questions being asked, Sean would force Cassie to stay locked away in a hotel room or in his home until her injuries went away. There are years of situations and instances showing how violent, aggressive, and controlling Sean Combs was to Cassie, including the 2016 hotel video camera footage in LA showing Cassie attempting to run away, Sean chasing after her. The video is horrendous. You can look it up. Cassie claims not only were the employees and staff that worked for Sean aware of what was happening, but essentially they helped him cover all of it up. Now we get to the arrangements that Sean Combs calls freak-offs. The first time this happened was months into him and Cassie's relationship. Sean Combs hired a man, brought him to his house in LA, directed the man to perform acts with his girlfriend as they all wore masquerade masks. Sean Combs played himself as he watched, and he recorded the acts. Sean Combs would demand these freak-offs all of the time at random times at his residences or at hotel rooms that he would destroy. His staff would be responsible for facilitating these freak-offs, flying sex workers in and out of the cities. If Sean requested a specific person, his staff would provide, making sure that there were more than enough for everyone. And the freak-offs got so intense, so violent, and disgusting that it was common practice afterwards for Cassie to get IV fluids in the following days plural, to recover from the extensive that were pushed onto her. Almost every single freak-off was recorded by Sean Combs. Cassie was reportedly repulsed by Sean's actions in the freak-offs, but she was so petrified of him, she felt as if she could not refuse. One time in 2015, following a freak-off, Cassie and Sean meet Cassie's friends at a hotel room. One of her friends says something that angers Sean. He grabs her friend, drags her over to the balcony, and dangles her by her ankle over the balcony of the 17th floor hotel suite. Cassie was reportedly so sedated from the freak-off that she was unable to respond to Sean's terrifying behavior. It was also common practice for Sean Combs to gift Cassie presents following a freak-off as his way of apologizing, I guess. At one point, Sean had given her so many designer bracelets that Cassie claimed she felt shackled by his presence. Believe it or not, that is not even scratching the tip of the iceberg of what Cassandra Ventura mentioned in her lawsuit against Sean Combs. But she files the lawsuit in 2023. They settle overnight. Just one day after, the case is settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. But it seems like that just opened up floodgates for what Sean Combs would be accused accused of. In March of this year, 2024, Homeland Security agents show up with search warrants at his residences in both Miami and LA. They raid his houses, leaving with a massive amount of physical evidence. Monday, September 16, 2024, rapper Sean P. Diddy Combs is arrested at the Park Hyatt Hotel in New York. He's charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Okay, so the 14-page indictment detailing the charges against Sean Combs has been unsealed, meaning we now know or have a better idea, allegedly, of what the prosecution, the Southern District of New York, thinks they will be able to prove in federal court. Also interesting that this is happening in federal court, because I think charges in federal court carry harsher punishments than if this was happening in, say, a state court. And that court, specifically the Southern District of New York, their conviction rate is 95%, meaning when they go after someone or when they choose to file a case, it's pretty safe to say that they feel confident in the evidence that they have and that they have done their homework. The day after he gets arrested, during a hearing, Sean Combs pleads not guilty. With his charges, he's facing a minimum of 15 years to life in prison. The indictment, which by the way is available for you if you just Google it, you can read it, the 14 pages, basically discusses in details the charges, the allegations, the incidents described, witness testimonies, and legal proceedings indicating potential next steps from the prosecution and or the defense. The first paragraph of said indictment says, for decades, Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy, aka Diddy, aka PD, aka Love, the defendant, abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees' resources and the influence of multi-business empires that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, amongst other crimes, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Now, Combs Enterprises is a company founded by Sean Combs. It's the umbrella company, and under it are different businesses and investments. From music, fashion, marketing, film, television, media, etc. A lot of businesses are housed under the umbrella that is Combs Enterprises. Based on the indictment, although no one else is named besides Sean Combs, allegations mentioned in the indictment match up almost exactly with previous civil lawsuits against Sean Combs, including Cassie Ventura's lawsuit. Even though no other people are named, if you know or if you have heard from people who have filed lawsuits against Sean, you can kind of see what victims or instances were the basis of the charges now. We also know that the government has conducted interviews with over 50 victims and witnesses, and they have stated that they only continue that number to grow. The government has also seized more than 90 cell phones, laptops, cloud storage accounts, hard drives, thumb drives, cameras, surveillance systems that they have said show criminal activity. The racketeering conspiracy charge is basically saying that there is a group of people involved in organized crime. The freak-offs are specifically mentioned in detail, including Sean's actions in the freak-offs and how his employees helped to facilitate them. His employees allegedly were responsible for booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking them with supplies such as baby oil, lighting. When the hotel rooms got damaged, his staff helped clean it up. The indictment states that the freak-offs happened often, sometimes even lasted days, and it points out that the victims were given to keep them obedient and compliant. During the raids of his houses in Miami and LA, law enforcement seized various freak-off supplies, which you can imagine what those were. Also, just recently, I saw a video late last night of, apparently, I didn't fact check this, but secret tunnels found underneath Sean's house. And I saw that those secret tunnels led to 6 locked rooms. I don't know if that's true, but if so, that's terrifying. That's a little info on the prosecution, what they believe that they can prove, and the evidence that they have, etc. Now, the defense team, they tried their hardest to get Sean Combs out on bail. They provided a bail package to the court stating why Sean Combs should be released awaiting trial. In their bail package, they were proposing a lot of things, but they were proposing a $15 million bond. They claimed that Sean Combs has been cooperative. They stated that he was apparently in town because he knew that there were charges being filed against him. And that was his way of saying, look, I'll cooperate, I won't flee, I won't run away, I'm not going to try and leave. They also proposed that he would surrender his passport as a way to further say that he was not going to try and flee and he just wanted to be in house arrest. His defense team also said that the raids, the way they raided his houses, was a little bit unnecessary. And at the end of their letter, they wrote, Sean Combs has never evaded, avoided, eluded, or ran from a challenge in his life. He will not start now. As he has handled every hardship, he will meet this case head on. He will work hard to defend himself and he will prevail. The prosecution also writes a letter to the judge further explaining their side as to why Sean should not be let out on bail. They're saying, cool, he wants to be on house arrest, us, well, a lot of the crimes have happened inside of his house, so that's not really going to do anything for us. And in their letter, they're saying, look at what he has done. Look at the nature of his crimes that are violent and serious, because they are showing the lengths that Sean Combs will go to get what he wants. They say if he is released, he remains a serious risk of flight. And most glaringly, Sean Combs also poses a significant risk of obstructing justice. Obstructing justice, I think, means that they're trying to say if he gets out, he has the chance to try and destroy evidence, to get rid of evidence, to talk to people, maybe witnesses, to try and hide more information, try to pay people off to stay quiet. If he gets out, he might do something to get in the way of the case, basically. Sean Combs has been denied bail twice now, and the trial is probably so far away. I don't think it's going to be a trial that we get to see on TV. I'm pretty sure the federal court does not allow audio or video recording in court, so I don't think that we will directly see any part of his trial. As far as who is involved, who has been to his parties but just attended the parties versus who has taken and can be held responsible for participating in the criminal activities, I mean, there are names being thrown out left and right, but I think that it all just depends on the digital evidence. Because imagine in federal court, someone is trying to prove something and they have video to prove that. I don't really see how you'll be able to argue against that. I don't know, pretty crazy though. I didn't do like a deep dive. I just wanted it to explain in literally like just a girl terms to make it, I think, easier for you guys to understand if you were having a hard time. I know there's so many things about this all over social media, but Sean Combs sucks. Anyway, let me know what you think. Thank you for spending time with me today. It's 6:30 in the morning. I work a real job, so if I want to film, sometimes I have to film at 6:30 in the morning. Love you guys so much. Go do something to make you happy, make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
I'm worried that she may be handing out our address. I worry that I'll come home from work one day to find both my children odd and murdered. This is the chilling letter that Esther Jai sent her daughter's social worker before her killing. Brianna Jai was gorgeous. She was flamboyant and fashionable and loved posting TikToks to thousands of followers online. But behind the scenes, she struggled. She had anxiety and sometimes battled with confidence issues behind closed doors. Brianna was born as Brett but transitioned when she was 14 and finally felt like she was free to be her true self. The family lived in Culcheth in Warrington, and Brianna seemed like the typical teenager. Sometimes she argued with her parents about what was best for her, like I feel like we all did when we were kids. Now, she'd been in quite a lot of trouble at school with things like failing to comply with the uniform policy and being on her phone, and she ended up getting excluded. Brianna's mum had expressed concerns multiple occasions to her social worker, and she really wanted to kind of bridge this gap that there seemed to have formed between them. On the 11th of February 2023, Brianna actually texted her mum to say that she was off to meet a friend called Scarlett, and her mum was really happy about this. She'd really been wanting her to battle through her anxiety, get out the house and start socializing again. Brianna, despite her anxiety, had bravely taken the bus to meet this friend. And when she told her mum, one of the last things her mum said to her was that she was proud of her. At 3 p.m, her mum got back home and then went on a dog walk over the local field. But she noticed that there was just loads of police everywhere, and she felt a bit worried about this and intimidated, so she cut her walk short. However, upon returning home, she noticed that there were police there too. They'd found a body and they believed it to be Brianna. Now, there is so much more to this story. I've actually read Brianna's mum's book. It's really good, but it's obviously heartbreaking. And I go into loads more detail on my episode about this case on the Born Investigation podcast. Essentially, 2 dog walkers made the call to emergency services after spotting a male and a female bending down to what they thought at the time would have been a dog or a doll. And when they got closer, they realised this was a body, and the male and the female ran off. When police got to the scene, they found Brianna lay face down with her white fluffy jacket covered in blood. A post-mortem confirmed that this was a murder. She'd been stabbed 28 times. Brianna's mum told officers about this Scarlett that she was due to meet, and officers ended up determining that this was Scarlett Jenkinson. She was a 15-year-old who'd recently moved to the same school as Brianna. Tips also came in to identify the male seen at the scene. This was 15-year-old Eddie Ratcliffe. The pair were in regular communication on social media, online, and it almost seemed like Scarlett was kind of coaching Eddie through life. It was a very strange relationship, almost like brother-sister. Although Eddie knew Scarlett for years, he had no connection to Brianna. He had no reason to want to hurt her. The connection was Scarlett. Then police received a phone call that they were not expecting. It was Scarlett Jenkinson's mum. She handed the phone over to Scarlett, and Scarlett admitted that the three of them had been together the day that Brianna was killed. She claimed, though, that Brianna had gone off to meet a 17-year-old from Manchester after spending some time with them. Police did actually arrest both Eddie and Scarlett despite this and searched their houses. A knife and clothes were seized and sent for analysis. Both suspects ended up kind of trying to blame each other, despite this first kind of lie that Scarlett had concocted about this Manchester guy. Evidence was mounting against them, and texts between the pair were absolutely horrific. And as I said on my podcast episode, I go into loads of detail about these texts, but I actually can't read them out on this app for obvious reasons. The text showed a really calculated and meticulously planned attack. And Brianna wasn't the only target. There were other people named in a kill list between the pair. Scarlett had a shockingly disturbing search history, and it even transpired that she'd tried to kill Brianna before by giving her something to drink. Luckily, Brianna threw up and was unharmed at that point. But there was also a sickening letter discovered by police in which Scarlett had planned the entire killing out. Chillingly, in order to try and cover her tracks, Scarlett had texted Brianna, knowing full well she was murdered. I mean, she was the one who murdered her. But these texts asked if she was okay and why she went off with a guy from Manchester. I mean, police could see right through this. She'd also sickeningly posted a photo of Brianna, calling her the best person she ever met, and said how sickening it was what had happened to her. All the time knowing full well that it was her to blame. Now, Eddie and Scarlett both pleaded not guilty, but were thankfully found guilty of murder and were given between 20 and 22 years in prison. As I said, for a deep dive into this case, check out the Born Investigation podcast.